Hello, welcome to the Hoop Collective and our special free agency edition. Joining me from New York City, where I just left and came back on a flight that only had limited bathrooms. We were told emergencies only. Is Tim Bontemps.
The people on the plane heard something was happening in Utah, so they had to get down to the ground as fast as possible. So,
howdy, partners. And I would think, Wendy, you would sit there and you would ask them, is that a number one or a number two?
I don't know. I got to think about it.
I got to tell you, the miracle of today was that I was permitted to talk about the Utah Jazz unfettered for 3 minutes on ESPN television.
I'll tell you what, they're going to have you before. They're going to have you talking about the Jazz all the time with that kind of performance.
It's never going to happen again, because that was the Mona Lisa of television performances. So it's not going to be an issue.
Yeah, well, that Royce O'Neal trade, man, that was
it's almost like that was talked about before you were on television today.
Yeah,
where would you have done that?
Podcast. If you want to see the art that exists in the content generation world, if you want to peel back the layers, the initial run that I basically did a version of it the night before, and to be honest with you, I liked the way it sounded, and I was like, you know what, So here's what happened.
That we're just fodder for him to practice his.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. He came up to me 15 minutes for a first take. He's like, I got to talk about the Jazz. Got to talk about the Jazz.
We also edited it out. We also edited out part of it, to be honest with you. The producer thought I went a little too far, basically saying that maybe Donovan Mitchell could be traded in a deal for a three-way trade. I was basically implying that could happen for Kevin Durant, and he thought I went a little too far, so he edited some of it out. But I kind of like. I mean, I had a pretty good feel.
But just say it now.
Now say it now. Yeah, he doesn't care now. Now we're off to the races.
That's always that happens. You always know way more than you can say, or you think you know more. I mean, last night when we got done working, Bontemps and I had dinner, and I was on the phone with you, MacMahon. We were trying to find out if the Gobert trade was going to go down last night. So
and it was pretty close to the trade that went down. The biggest difference was we thought Jaden McDaniels was going to be in that trade. The Jazz wanted Jaden McDaniels in that trade. The Wolves refused, and that's why I think that is reflected in the number of picks and the lack of protection on the picks.
Well, how about this? How about that they sent a guy who's got $170 million left on his contract, albeit a high quality player, but he's got $170 million on his contract. I think that's about right. Right?
It was a 5-year, $205 million deal that's got 4 years left. So that math seems pretty good.
And they took back all players who have no guaranteed money after this year.
Not all, but like the two bigger salaries, Beverly and Beasley. Beasley's got a team option after this year. Beverly's just a 1-year deal. And then some of the younger guys, obviously. You know what, though? You might be right, because it might be like
I think I checked. They have no guaranteed money. So, like,
no, certainly it's a massive cost-cutting deal for the Jazz, as well as a ton of draft capital.
No guaranteed money after this year.
Right. So when you take that they also traded Royce O'Neal, I think it's in the neighborhood of $150 million off the books. Now, obviously, they're going to still spend. The Jazz are going to still spend money, but they cleaned off a lot of, in addition to maybe not getting the quote-unquote premium player package. The Jazz got a lot of money off their books and got. And
I don't think that is done, brother. I don't think that the cost cutting is done.
To use a phrase that someone might have said a few times today, something is going on in Utah, because, guys, I'll ask you a question, since we're asking questions about Utah today. If you have a several-time Defensive Player of the Year and future Hall of Fame center, still in his prime, all-star caliber player, and you trade him for a collection of expiring contracts and draft assets, what does that say about your team?
You're rebuilding.
And with that being said, what does it say about your team when you have Donovan Mitchell and in his prime star with 3 years left on his contract, still on the team, surrounded by a bunch of players who are either at the end of their career, are on expiring contracts, or are not really contributing?
I'm sorry.
What does it say about your team?
They're retooling the roster around
You know what?
Donovan Mitchell.
To be honest with
retooling
you, had the Royce O'Neal trade not happened, they might have been able to kind of sell it to Donovan. Like if they said, look, we just couldn't say no to this offer. Minnesota just kept coming and coming and coming. Donovan, my God, I mean, they gave us 5 first-round picks. Give us a few months, and we're gonna flip this. We're gonna use this flexibility. Like it's a plausible argument where there's like, look, man, somebody knocked on my door and offered me 5 times the price for my house. I had to take. We got to move. The Royce O'Neal trade that happened the day before. There's no explaining that away.
Yeah,
no, it's for a pick next year to save money.
Yeah, that was the canary in the coal mine.
And let's be honest.
And when it happened on the same day that they cut Eric Pascal, who's like his best friend.
Royce O'Neal was his best friend on the Jazz until Eric Pascal was acquired after Donovan strongly suggested they do so. And then he had his NBA best friend and his childhood best friend. Neither one of them are on the Jazz roster anymore. Rudy Gobert was not on his list of best friends. He was not on that BFF in that BFF bunch.
But I thought they had lunch together sometimes at the cafeteria.
Every once in a while. I don't think they have to sell Donovan Mitchell on, hey, here's why we made this Rudy trade. But whether they made the Rudy trade or not, they were going to have to sell him if they wanted to on staying in Salt Lake City. And look, we talked all year long about it, and then their season's over. He's sitting up at the podium. I asked him straight up, kind of pushed him on. There's all this talk that you want out. What's up? And he basically said, yeah, give me a week. Give me a week or so. Well, he's posted a few times on Instagram since then, but has not addressed that issue. And like anybody who thinks, okay, wow, they're going to retool this thing and give them 18 months, couple years. Man, Donovan Mitchell's not going to be there in 18 months or 2 years.
I guess it's possible that they don't trade him now, but I mean, I think that the league thinks he's getting traded soon.
Yeah, you're right. They're not fooling anybody. And I don't think he's on the roster when the season starts. Maybe he is. I'd be shocked if he's on the roster after the trade deadline.
Well, there's two.
And why? Like for what?
Let's just game it out, right? As I was talking to executive about this a little while ago. In the situation they're in, they just got all these valuable picks, right? All these unprotected picks from Minnesota. They could go out over the next couple of weeks. They do have a lot of expiring contracts on the roster now, right? They do have a bunch of picks. They could go out and try to get, I'm not going to start naming players and do fantasy trades, but like they could go out and try to trade for 2 or 3 or 4 players and remake the team on the fly around Donovan Mitchell if they want to, or if they want to try to.
Haven't signed anybody. The Nets have signed 3 or 4 guys. They haven't even signed anybody.
I'm just saying,
if you're going to do that, are you hiring a 34-year-old first-time head coach?
Well, that's
giving him a 5-year contract.
That's right. That's the other part of this. And I think it's something else that's worth pointing out that I heard today, because I was talking to people. We were all talking to people leading up to free agency, and obviously the whole "what is Utah going to do" thing came up a bunch. And the sense that I got was that the Jazz, Danny Ainge had not been given a mandate to trade Rudy Gobert and or Donovan Mitchell anywhere, but that if he got bowled over with an offer, particularly for Rudy, he would look hard at it and maybe do it. And you look at this offer, like you said off the top, Brian, basically all expiring money and just a
gobsmacking,
just an amazing haul of picks, getting essentially 5 first-round picks between all the picks they got, the swaps they got, getting Walker Kessler, who is a pretty good defensive big himself. Like that is an enormous push in by the Wolves. And we'll get to the Wolves in a minute, but that's a trade that you have to make that trade. I don't care if you wanted to keep Rudy Gobert on your team. Like with where Utah's been, That's a trade you have to make. But now it leaves the
you
question
just got spanked in the first round by a Dallas team that didn't have Luka for the first half of
Quinn
the series.
Snyder quit.
I'm saying
he didn't know that this exactly was coming this fast, but he knew it was coming.
Right.
Well,
I'm not saying,
I will say this. I don't know that Quinn felt like the direction of the franchise had been determined.
Yeah, but he knew that this was on the table.
Well, he knew that he had taken this chapter of the Jazz to the greatest heights that it was going to reach. I will say
All right. Okay. Hold on. That's enough about the Jazz. I mean, we'll talk about it more later.
Yeah, let's get to the fascinating part of this.
I want to talk about Minnesota real quick.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, the fascinating part is where Donovan Mitchell goes.
I'm fascinated by Minnesota.
These words have never been spoken before.
Well, a lot of things were spoken about Utah on ESPN today. So
no, we hold on. We've had fascination about Minnesota before. We were all giddy about they got Wiggins and Cat and and Levine. Like, woo, boy, this thing's taken off. And then there was some fascination during the Jimmy Butler. I'm not going to call it an era. The Jimmy Butler blip, both positively and then
that's right.
And then the way that thing went down in flames. Speaking of great chemistry, let's get into this Twin Tower tandem here. This thing, it will be interesting.
These are twin diamond towers. They're $430 million contracts between the two of them.
Well, and I'm fascinated by this whole thing. So Tim Connolly gets this job a month ago. Was it even a month ago? I mean, comes into this job running the team a few weeks ago, and almost instantly goes all in on Rudy Gobert, the guy who, went up against his star center in Denver, Nikola Jokic, time and time again, the past bunch of years in the same division. He's probably seen Rudy Gobert play as much or more than anybody in the NBA the past several years. And now to me, you only make this trade if you're the Timberwolves, if you think you can win a championship with Anthony Edwards, Karl Towns, and Rudy Gobert. To trade this kind of package at this time in Rudy's career, to me, this is them saying, we think we can legitimately win a championship with these three guys. And the idea that they're going to, I
don't know this to be true. This is not a report. We got that. But I suspect that this was an excitement thing with the new ownership there.
I would also say I have not talked to Cat directly, but kind of the people I've talked to around the league do feel like Cat really had been pushing hard to play power forward. That this just wasn't Tim Connolly coming in, and I mean, obviously Cat's on board with it.
I can't see Tim Connolly in a vacuum taking and doing this trade. There had to have been an outside force that was encouraging.
Well, hold on a second. Let me push back on that a little bit. I'm not saying that you're wrong, because if you look at the way things went in Denver, they were a very patient organization all the way through. But
he drafted very well.
But at the same time, he literally was just hired to run basketball operations a month ago. It's not like he's a guy.
When he got the job, he goes, "I really don't have a plan in place," I think is what he said.
I mean, it's not like he's never done the job before. This is one of the best executives in the league, like a very widely respected guy. The idea that he's going to get hired and come in and immediately get told, yeah, go sit in the corner, us new owners are going to make a trade. Like, I mean, I just don't.
No, I'm not saying that. No. I want to be clear. There's some nuance here. That's not what I'm saying. I think he was obviously going to do it, but I think him paying 5 first-round picks. I mean,
well, I think he paid 5 first-round picks because they valued Rudy Gobert and they traded a bunch of expiring contracts, and that was the value that Utah got for him, was picks.
Yeah.
Right. And they could have moved Cat to the 4, gotten a shot blocker for a lot cheaper. I don't know what the price is.
I mean, they just drafted Walker Kessler in the first round.
Well, he's a backup. He's a backup.
I'm saying I don't know what the price is for Miles Turner, but I highly doubt it's 5 first-round picks. I mean, come on, let's be realistic here. So I do think Cat wanted to be the 4. I think Chris Finch was completely on board that idea. If they could get a dominant rim protector, and because that was the biggest glaring weakness of Minnesota last year, was that, despite being mediocre overall defensively, they were one of the worst in the league in terms of rim protection. Obviously,
and they were looking at centers back in the trade deadline too. This isn't like a last second thing. They were looking.
They will not be last in the league defending the rim this year.
No, they will not be. And it's the fit will be interesting. I do think Finch is one of the most creative coaches in the league. I trust him to kind of figure out how to make the X's and O's work. Cat is the Spigsbomote, self-proclaimed greatest shooting big man of all time. So listen, like you don't. And what's interesting is Gobert has played much of his career in two big lineups. If you remember, Derek Favors for a big chunk, and the Jazz ultimately went away from that because the spacing did get so clunky. It was problematic.
Not going to have spacing issues with Karl Towns.
Yeah. Towns can shoot it from 30 feet. Towns, he's basically a 7-foot wing offensively who can he is one of the most talented offensive bigs.
Well, we'll say if you're in the Western Conference and you're looking at your potential playoff opponents and you're Karl Towns, you're like, man, there's a lot of big dudes out here that you could see in a playoffs, whether it's Steven Adams, Jonas Valanciunas, Jusuf Nurkic, Nikola Jokic. I mean, I can see why he is like, look, I don't want that burden. Although,
and anchoring a defense is hard work.
Right. And the thing that kind of makes him special, though, is that he's got an advantage on centers because of how he can stretch the floor. So he's given up potentially some of that advantage because the guys who are going to be playing with him are going to be a little bit more mobile, but he's figuring that he can shoot over.
He can shoot over the 6'8", 6'9" guys that play the 4 a lot.
Absolutely.
In today's NBA. And I'll say that defensively, I mean, Rudy's right back to, hey, you're going to have to prop up a defense. Cat at the 4. Anthony Edwards should be a plus defender, but if Russell's playing point guard, come on, Russell's as bad as Donovan Mitchell defensively.
Well, I'm the only thing I'm going to push back on a little bit there, and obviously Russell's not a good defensive player. He's that setting him aside, but the difference between here and Utah is Anthony Edwards. We saw him guarding Ja Morant in playoff games. He can guard people. And
he definitely has the physical ability to.
And Jaden McDaniels can guard people. Like they have some athletes,
sure.
Torian Prince can guard. Like they have some athletes on the wing.
And Kyle Anderson,
solid.
And Kyle Anderson is a big time pickup. He's a really good player who can guard people. Like Kyle Anderson,
and has some playmaking ability.
Yeah. By the way, like Kyle Anderson could sort of be a de facto point guard with this team, and you could have Anthony Edwards handle the ball a lot more, and maybe you move along from D'Angelo Russell. I could certainly see that happening. There was some talk that
D'Angelo I could certainly recommend that happening.
Well, I had heard some chatter that D'Angelo Russell at times was in this trade and ultimately eventually was not. I don't know if that is true or not, but I think to me, I really like the fit. I think playing Karl essentially as the one true negative on the court defensively, setting Russell aside, let's say in the closing lineups, you have Kyle Anderson out there instead. You have one negative defender in Karl. That's a lot different than Utah. Everybody says, oh, Rudy couldn't guard anybody in the playoffs. As we've talked about many times on the pod, they had 4 terrible defenders on the perimeter, and then Rudy's trying to make up for everybody at once. It was not like Rudy was getting schooled all over the place by every guy on the court.
Right.
And I think this team has a chance to be a top 5 offense and defense and win a ton of games. Now, they might struggle at times in the playoffs, but right. I think they're going to be a regular season monster next season.
I got mixed reviews when I was talking to people around the league about it. I will say the people I talked to that know Rudy the best really were high on it working. So, take that for what it's worth. And I'll also say, with all due respect to Donovan Mitchell, who is a phenomenal talent, I think Rudy has the 2 best offensive players that he's ever played with now on the Timberwolves roster. And that's projecting that Edwards is going to continue growing. But Edwards at 20 years old was really good last year. And then, I don't think there's any question, just as a pure offensive talent, that Cat is above Donovan Mitchell.
I mean, Karl's as good as any offensive big ever in terms of his overall skill set. Like he can do just about anything with the ball.
I know that occasionally in the last 20 years, the Timberwolves have made big trades. Obviously, the Jimmy Butler acquisition was a big trade. Back the last time they were a serious contender, they think they traded in the same offseason for Sam Cassell, Latrell Sprewell, put him around KG. But this is this kind of acquisition on the heels of the Tim Connolly acquisition, having two $200 million players on their roster. This is the influence of Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez.
Yeah. And by the way, it'll be 3 in a couple of years. And Edwards will get a $200 million contract.
It's a fair guess. So, and as you mentioned, Rudy's got 4 years left on that sucker. That's a real, and they're going to have that work.
It's a huge bet financially, and there's not a backup plan when you give up that many picks. You are all in.
And look, I also think it's cool that they did it. Like, I like it when teams make a play like this. Like, I think it's going to be. I'm genuinely fascinated to watch him play. I think Rudy has been undervalued in the market. Like, there was very little interest in him, it seemed like, compared to what there should have been, in my opinion. I know he's got a big contract, but I think people just were too down on Rudy because some of the yakety sack stuff people were saying about the way the Jazz fell out of these playoff series. And I just don't think people gave Rudy enough credit for them completely retooling that team around his skill set and using it to maximize every possible inch out of what the Jazz could be. So I'm with you, McMahon, playing with guys like Edwards and Towns on this team with better defensive talent around them. Tim Connolly is going to be able to go find some guys. He's been, Denver over his time there was good at finding guys like PJ Dozier, getting Austin Rivers off the scrap heap. Like, he was always good at kind of
Monty
Morris in the second round. He's always been good at manufacturing players through the draft and through the margins. I think he'll be able to do that. Like, I'm really excited to see what Minnesota looks like. And I think it's cool, especially with everybody's talking about going small all the time, right? The fact that they're going way in the other direction. We saw Boston this year have a lot of success going way in the other direction, playing Al Horford and Robert Williams a lot. I think it's cool to see teams doing something different, and I'm excited to see what it looks like.
And Cleveland had success, and those were two bigs who weren't shooters.
That's true.
All right. So we're 30 hours in for this when we're recording this, 30 hours into the Kevin Durant trade request. A couple of things are starting to become clear. One is that Durant's preference, Phoenix, it seems from what I understand that Brooklyn just isn't interested in what Phoenix can offer in a straight deal. So if Durant is going to get his number one choice, and that's his number one choice today, it might not be his number one choice by the end of the weekend. I think it's going to take a third team, which is why the possible Donovan Mitchell availability is interesting, because especially if Utah is prioritizing draft picks and what's going to take them is an overwhelming draft pick offer, the Suns can offer their whole draft. They
can also offer DeAndre Ayton sign and trade. Hey, you need a nice young center.
That's true. That's true. Well, one thing important to point out. So if I have been told, and this is hardly shocking, this is not exactly a lot of insight, but whatever. I was told that when Brooklyn's talked to teams, they said, "Listen, we want an under 25-year-old all-star." I was actually told we want multiple under 25-year-old all-stars. I'm like, well, how many under 25 all-stars are there?
Yeah, right.
Not to mention, because they have Ben
Where are you
Simmons,
going to trade him to? Team USA?
Plus, they have Ben Simmons on their roster, which knocks out like 15 under 25 players on designated player
contracts. For example, the Nets currently couldn't trade for Donovan Mitchell because Ben Simmons is on their roster.
They would either have to move Simmons in that trade or move him in a separate trade.
That's right. So it's complicated. But it's going to take a 3-team trade, I think, maybe even 14. I mean, heck.
To get him to Phoenix.
I mean, Bontemps, do you want to talk about what you came up with at dinner last night? Or are you not prepared to say that?
Well, the short answer is that deal won't quite work the way I constructed it. But
Okay.
I think we
thought there was a possibility that there could be a 4-team
I've
trade
been-
in this Minnesota. Minnesota could get involved in this.
Yeah, I mean, there are 3 and 14 constructions of trades floating around the league. I got sent one tonight. Like people are talking about, because right now, as we talked about yesterday, everybody's kind of on hold. There's still things happening here. Obviously, the Rudy Gobert deal happened today, but like Minnesota wasn't.
The Rudy Gobert deal could end up being part of the Kevin Durant deal.
Well,
That could end up.
It could be,
especially if Utah is involved.
It could be, but I'm just saying, like that deal in and of itself wasn't part of this trade. So, like,
That's right.
Boston traded for Malcolm Brogdon today. That's separate from what's going on with this. So, like, other things are going to happen here, but a lot of the league business is on hold right now, waiting to see what happens with Kevin Durant. So everybody is kind of going, well, what about this deal? What about that deal? What about this place? What about that place? That's what everybody is doing right now. So yeah, like you could construct 3 and 4 team scenarios pretty simply involving.
So throw out your hypothetical. The idea. We don't have to. Don't need to.
The
nail
idea. We've laid the idea out. The basic
math.
idea would be I mean, Brian essentially laid it out before. The basic idea is the Suns have Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, DeAndre Ayton, all their picks.
Mm-hmm.
You use
might take Landry Shamet being involved too.
Well, I mean, again, we're getting way too far down the rabbit hole. The point is that's the Suns package of interesting stuff, right? If the Nets aren't interested in that for Donovan Mitchell, or not for Donovan Mitchell, for Kevin Durant, then you have to start going to find other stuff. Well, you could theoretically send all the picks to Utah, all 7 picks, and Ben Simmons.
No, not 7 picks, 4 picks and 3 swaps.
Okay. The rights to all 7 picks. That for people listening to the pod, I think they know what I meant. The rights to
it's the aggregation. Phoenix offers 7 picks.
Right.
Well, you can't aggregate a hypothetical.
Yeah,
I guess you can, but
anyway, you couldn't in theory send the rights to all those picks to Utah with Ben Simmons for Donovan Mitchell, and then send Donovan Mitchell and Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson to Brooklyn. And there's a hypothetical trade for Kevin Durant.
In that trade, Brooklyn may not get any picks, but
they'd get Donovan Mitchell and Mikal.
They'd get their 25-year-old all-star or less all-star plus.
And Bridges he's not an all-star, but he ain't real far from it.
And to be clear, the things that were floating around that I heard about tonight, they didn't even include Donovan Mitchell. So like, there's all kinds of stuff just floating around.
But let's discuss, if you don't mind, the other alternatives that are sort of presenting themselves that are just 2-team trades.
Okay, and Woj hit this one on NBA Today. Toronto.
Yeah, I believe Toronto thinks it's in the game on Kevin Durant also.
And Masai, his history. If he's willing to take that kind of, to go all in on Kawhi Leonard with a year left on his contract, why wouldn't he do it with KD for 4? I'm
gonna give one bit of a counter to that. The difference between this situation and the Kawhi Leonard situation for Toronto is that Toronto ultimately didn't give up very much for Kawhi Leonard.
Cheap deal.
I mean, DeMar DeRozan,
1 year.
DeMar DeRozan, well, I understand, but DeMar DeRozan was one of the faces of the Raptors franchise. But that Raptors team was sort of like the Jazz, and they had popped out, and Masai turned him and Jakob Poeltl in a very late first-round pick, which I think became Keldon Johnson ultimately. But
good pick.
It was a very late first-round pick. They turned that into Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green.
They also got Danny Green. That's right. That's
not just Kawhi Leonard, but Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green, 2 of the 5 starters on their championship team. So that was a no-brainer trade. This Kevin Durant trade, I think they need to at least know that Kevin Durant is somewhat on board with going to Toronto to give up the kind of package they're going to have to get Kevin Durant.
Okay.
I don't think they're going to do it on spec, is my point.
First off, we talked a lot about how the Suns have control of their whole draft, which is you can trade stuff in 7-year increments. Mm-hmm. Guess who else does?
The Toronto
Raptors. So the Raptors could provide the picks. Now, I talk about an under 25 star who isn't on a designated player contract because he's still on his rookie contract. reigning rookie of the year, Scotty Barnes. Now, I have to believe that there's no package that the Nets would want that wouldn't include Scotty Barnes.
You don't think they can talk him into, hey, Pascal Siakam's a young all-star?
Fred Van
But
Vliet,
I hear you.
reigning all-star.
But they've got a lot of guys who make decent money but are on good contracts, who are good young players. OG Anunoby, Gary Trent Jr., Fred Van Vliet. Siakam's a little bit more money. Obviously, Scotty Barnes on
If
his
you wanted the
rookie deal.
premium package, in my view, it's OG Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, and now we talk about draft pick compensation. Those two guys are really good, so maybe you couldn't. If I was Toronto, I wouldn't want the 4 picks and 3 swaps. We can negotiate that because, you're trading them 2 really good players, better than any player I think Phoenix could trade. With all due respect, so maybe you can get on that. But
Both players are better.
No. Barnes is better than
Barnes
anything
is
Phoenix
better.
could offer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to argue Bridges over Anunoby, but
no, fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe you fight on the picks thing there, but yeah, I mean, so here's the thing, like, Masai, like the thing is, like, you could just trade for him, and if he's upset, just say, come sit with me and let's talk about it. Because the thing about Durant is that he loves to play.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's got it in him to rock the boat enough. And also, he's a guy who, frankly, can be, I don't know what talked into. It sounds like it's like a sham, like you're hoodwinking him. But he can be convinced of things. He can be convinced of certain situations. And as the day has gone on, and I've thought more and more about this, I'm starting to envision how this could happen. And I'm starting to envision that he may put up a fight before it would happen because he may like rattle the saber about, no, I don't want to go there. But if they did it anyway, and I don't think Masai would be afraid of that, they might be able to pull that off.
Like I said, I think Masai would feel very confident that he could talk to Kevin and convince him that being in Toronto is the right thing. I find it very hard to believe the Raptors on spec would make this trade without knowing Kevin Durant would really want to be there. Because again, you're taught Kevin Durant is one of the all-time great players. He's also 34. Scotty Barnes is 20 and looks like he's got a chance to be a tremendous player. This is not trading DeMar DeRozan and Jakob Poeltl and a late first round pick.
And would you do that? Like, would you say I would give Barnes for?
I don't think it's an obvious yes to me.
I agree.
I'm not saying I wouldn't do it. I'd really have to think about it. And that's why, to me, I'm not doing that unless Kevin's like, I'm in. Which I think Masai could convince him to, and I think there's a chance he would do it. But
if the Nets wanted Barnes bad enough, they could grant permission for Durant to talk. Now Durant could be like, no, I'm not talking because I don't want to be convinced. But I mean, that is the one thing I just think is worth pointing out. This difference between this and Kawhi. It's just the price is just so much different. Let me ask you this: is a team with Pascal Siakam, Fred Van Vliet, and Kevin Durant a championship team?
I mean, Gary Trent Jr. I think they'd have a chance. They'd have a chance.
Nick Nurse has proven to be creative and
I mean,
effective.
It's essentially the Raptors from this year with, the Raptors this year won close to 50 games with OG
Siakam
in and out of the lineup a bunch. Yeah. Like it'd be a pretty damn good team.
Yeah. I mean, as the day's gone on, I've thought about the other team is New Orleans.
We talked
New Orleans
about that
has not extended Zion yet. Now, I was talking to an executive tonight, and he was like, if I was the Nets, I'd ask for Zion and Brandon Ingram. And I go, okay, well, I mean,
you could start there, and then they'll say no, and then you work down. Sure.
And they'll say, hey, we've got 1,000,006 picks. Here's half of them. and you can figure something out.
Okay, let me ask a couple of things here. One, would you want Brandon Ingram or would you want Zion Williamson?
Which side am I talking about?
You're talking about the Nets.
So what, Brooklyn?
I mean, I'd want Zion just because if you're going to do something like if you got to trade KD, like I like Brandon Ingram a lot, and there's a lot
He's
of
kind of
risk
like
with Zion.
KD Jr.
He's kind of like KD light.
I can make a pretty good argument. I can make a pretty good argument. I think if I'm the Pelicans, I'd rather trade Zion.
Well, if I'm the Nets, I think I would rather have Zion because
we did have the availability speech from Sean Marks.
What's that?
We had the availability.
Oh,
yeah.
True. Yeah, that's true.
And I just still wonder, for as great as Zion is, I know we've only seen him play a little bit, or as great as his potential is, I do just really wonder how much what your ceiling's really going to be if you're playing a 6'5" center who doesn't really play a lot of defense.
I mean, they obviously could change their roster up a lot, but I'm thinking about Zion and Ben Simmons. I'm like, well, that doesn't sound so good. Two guys who can't shoot outside the paint. Of course, Zion's one of the greatest paint scorers I've seen in my life.
Right. Well, I mean, if you're the net, like,
do you think Zion would have passed when he saw Trae Young come over to help in that?
No, I do not.
Probably not.
No,
probably not.
He'd have both those hands around that rim. Is where.
But if I'm New Orleans, to me, if I could do a trade based around Zion, now it gets a little tricky to do it with Zion because he doesn't make a ton of money, so you'd have to stack a couple of contracts together. They have some contracts to stack.
Well. I'd ask about CJ McCollum in that case. I think CJ McCollum.
Well, if you're trying to get Kevin Durant to stay there, I think you need CJ, who he's friends with on the team, to.
Right. I think they'd say, how do you feel about Valanciunas? And
yeah. I mean,
that's a problem.
The point would be you'd have Zion. They could stack contracts to get to the money without it having to include CJ. But my point is, if you could end up with a team coming out of it with Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram, KD, CJ McCollum.
I'm getting Herb Jones in that negotiation.
I mean, listen, I think with all the picks the Pelicans have, and if they're putting Zion Williamson in the trade again, if we're just doing hypothetical trade stuff, I'm pretty sure you can keep Herb Jones out of that trade.
Well, whatever. I'm trying to get him, especially
you can try to get him, but sure. But I think David Griffin can hold the line on that. So
we come back to it. What if KG says, I don't. I mean, with all due respect, I don't want to play in New Orleans. So here's the Pelicans card they're going to play, from what I'm told. Willie Green, who is their well-respected, well-liked head coach, was an assistant in Golden State when Durant was there. And again, what they would like is for the Nets, if they liked the option, to let them speak with Durant and let Willie attempt to sell the vision that they have and use that relationship that they have. And, again, the idea here is just like Masai is charismatic and you just get him in the room, they think that Willie is charismatic and that's their sort of weapon here, and get him in the room with Kevin. I don't know if Kevin would allow such a meeting to happen. Just because the Nets would grant doesn't mean Kevin would allow it. I still would have to put the odds-on favorite to be Phoenix, because even though I'm looking at New Orleans in a vacuum, I think New Orleans and Toronto maybe make better offers. I've just been around long enough to know that when a player like this wants something, he gets it.
Well, and it's
James
not
Harden wanted Brooklyn, he got it. James Harden wanted Philly, he got it.
Right.
I mean, it
2 years left on his contract, a year and a half left on his contract,
which is why
or a half
I
year.
think the door does stay open.
Yeah, it is different. It is a different situation, but you're right that superstars don't tend to get traded places they don't want to be.
And with
the exception of Kawhi.
Well, and the other thing, right, which was a very unique circumstance on a whole bunch of levels, where basically Toronto took a complete flyer, and this is not going to be a complete flyer price. This is going to be a very heavy price. So you're going to want some idea the guy's going to want to play. And I do think, like, if let's say Kevin Durant's only option was the Lakers, or his only option was Miami, which we've talked about a bunch. We all pretty much agree it's going to be hard for Miami to get to the kind of package we're talking about. I think then these other options would be more plausible in terms of me trying to rank, like, could one of these things get ahead of Phoenix? Phoenix has a lot to offer in a trade.
Yeah.
It might not be exactly what they want, but again, they go around, they shop around a little bit. I think there's a deal to be done there with all those picks and those young guys where I think they can find a way to get something that Brooklyn wants ultimately. Because it's not like they have nothing. It's like, well, we got like a couple firsts and one okay player, like give us Kevin Durant. I mean, all their picks and Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson and DeAndre Ayton to sign a trade somewhere. That's a lot of stuff. Like, it's not, that is not a, oh yeah, you know, here's a bag of balls. Give us one of the best players of all time.
All right. So I think we got a genuine race here. And I think this is really going to come down to, you know, how willing are the Nets to not care about where they send Durant?
Or,
and like, look, maybe this is the new freshly installed backbone Brooklyn Nets. They showed backbone against Kyrie when they you know, refused to acquiesce on a although they did offer him long-term contracts. It wasn't like they were like you know, option or bust.
Right.
the other part of it is, does Kevin consider other teams too? Like, is it only Phoenix and Miami, or does he think about going to Toronto? Does he think about going to name your other team?
But there might even be teams not on his list. I mean, might even be other teams, you know, that we're not even thinking about.
Right. But does he think about going other places like that? That obviously would change things too.
Yeah. So, you know, there is the thought that you have, if you're Brooklyn, who someday may want to sign other free agents, who say, if you know, just cold send Durant to, you know, Toronto, and he doesn't want to be there and he's miserable, even though I actually am coming around to the idea that he could be talked into it.
Could I ask one question about the Durant situation, about this thing before we go? Everybody's talking about Durant having this, you know, Durant's under contract for 4 years, right? So like, you have all this leverage. This is just something I've been thinking about. Doesn't Durant deserve some credit from the Nets for, remember last summer, they were like, everybody's going to sign, right? Everybody's going to lock in.
One guy who actually,
and he, like, from the beginning,
paper
way ahead, first day of free agency, if I remember right, he locked right in. Like, I'm here. I want to be here. This is where I'm going to be.
Which is why I'm saying, if you ever want to sign a free agent again, do you want him?
Well, that's my point.
After this, they might say we never want to sign another one again.
They might say they never want anyone again.
That's what they say, but that ain't going to be real.
I've been thinking about that a lot, because everybody, like, that's kind of the popular name. Oh, we signed for 4 years, so just send him wherever you want. Who cares? Get the best package you can get. Like, he did what they all were supposed to do. Like, I don't know. I'm not saying he has not been a perfect actor here by any stretch. I'm not trying to make it seem like they should just do whatever he wants. But I also don't think it's quite as simple as, well, he's under contract, so therefore, who cares about where he goes?
Yeah. And you know what? I will say this. Regardless of how this plays out, they're still going to be located in Brooklyn, right? And I think a lot of times we go, oh, a free agent will never go there again. Okay, well, guess what? If they're putting a massive contract on the table, located in Brooklyn, I just have a hard time believing the Nets are never going to get a free agent to go there again.
All right,
so I think that stuff gets overblown. The other thing, they're not sending him to Sacramento or Siberia. They'd be sending him to a situation where he would have a chance to contend.
Fair. And maybe he would come around to that. Before we go, I want to talk. I don't know if, considering these other options we're saying, I don't know if Miami has the package to get Durant, but I want to move past that. Does Miami have a package to get Donovan Mitchell?
I tell you what, I think it's tough, because Danny Ainge reminded us once again today that he drives a really hard bargain.
The teams in New York, like, let's set the Nets aside. The New York Knicks have been stockpiling picks to get a star. The Knicks have all kinds of picks. How many picks are they trade right now, Brian? 8?
8.
They can actually
trade the four
picks
that aren't theirs. They have the 3 that they just picked up. One is Milwaukee's, one is Charlotte's, one is, I can't remember. and then they have Dallas's next year. All of those have
Milwaukee's pick is in like 3 years. I think it's top 4 protected. There's at least a chance it's a decent pick.
Okay, but it's not
And
like
don't they have
that's
the
the centerpiece.
No,
they have
the
pick from
valuable
OKC
picks
via Washington and whatever
Right.
the other one is, Detroit, I think.
Yeah,
Right.
there's protection. There's protections on
saying,
those.
the Knicks-
None of
I'm
those
just-
are crown jewels.
I'm just saying the Knicks have a bunch of good, not great,
Okay.
but good
Hold
young
on.
players and a billion picks.
1 second. For the price for Gobert was 3 unprotected and a swap, plus a protected other 4th pick.
And a pretty lightly protected that. Top 5.
What's the price for the Knicks if they want Donovan Mitchell?
Now, well, the other part of that too is that that was the only value the Jazz got in the trade. So I think that I'm just saying, I don't think it's not as simple as, well, they traded
Complete
4 picks.
disregard for Jared Vanderbilt.
Jared Vanderbilt is, I think, a decent player.
I agree.
But everybody else in the trade was basically just salary. So
I mean,
Malik
I
Beasley's
disagree with
okay.
that, but we're not going to get.
All right,
Kessler's
let's
got
move past
potential.
it.
doesn't
Whatever.
matter.
We're not
Doesn't
going to get
matter.
into that.
The Knicks have guys like Emmanuel Quickly, Obi Toppin, RJ Barrett. Like they have young players with some value. Like it's not like it's different than a bunch of big contracts.
But none of them is like a.
No, but but it's not negative. It's not like
Barrett is a very good young player, but
the thing about Barrett, let me just say this, is that if you trade for Barrett, whether you're the Jazz or anybody else, Bontemps just said he's extension eligible.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not a discount, and you got to negotiate with him right away.
But anyway, my point is the Knicks have a million picks. They have their picks, and the Knicks have been waiting and waiting and waiting for a star. And CA, the former guy who used to run CA's basketball division, Leon Rose, runs the Knicks, and Donovan Mitchell, his dad worked for the Nets. He's a New York guy. It would be they'd be celebrating in New York for weeks.
Also, they might if they might edge out the Nets if the Nets were interested there. I mean, depending on what they would get for Durant, but that would be big because So let me ask you: do they offer all 8?
Well, to me, the Knicks have more to offer than Miami does. So if Donovan Mitchell really becomes available, I just don't see how Miami can, let alone anybody else. I don't see how Miami could outdo the Knicks.
You offer all 8. I mean, that's not your first offer, obviously, but
I mean, if I was Danny Ainge, I'd probably just say, New York, give me your draft, please.
Those 4 firsts and 3 swaps.
Yeah, give me your draft. Bet on the Knicks. Bet on the Knicks. Bet on the Knicks being bad.
She short the Knicks, basically. Hey, listen, I mean, if they're trading, I will say this: if Ainge is trading Donovan Mitchell, a young all-star under long-term contract.
Danny Ainge had success trading a player to New York and getting a lot of draft picks in the past.
I know, but those guys were over the hill. If he's trading Donovan Mitchell, he obviously doesn't think he's a different. I mean, A1A piece. He's probably saying, well, I could see him saying, I don't believe that he's going to be a difference maker there. I could see him trying to short the Knicks and get their picks.
Well, I can see him just shorting the Knicks because the Knicks have been bad for
the
better part of 20 years.
Right.
To go behind the screen for a second, Malik Andrews called me before the free agency show yesterday. And so she thought at the time she was going to have to do Phil in the show, which, believe it or not, we didn't have to Phil when the Kevin Durant news happened a couple hours later. And I was standing there with Brian, and she asked me about a stat about the last time the Knicks extended a player on a first round pick off their rookie deal, which is Charlie Ward in the mid 90s. And she said, well,
that's no longer true.
Well, no, because Mitchell Robinson is not a first round.
Okay, he's a first round, but he's a rookie coming off his deal.
That was not the
okay.
Not
fine.
the thing.
That's not
anyway.
Let's not split hairs.
But we were talking about it, and I made a joke that the Knicks have drafted many guys with their picks since then. They've been all stars, guys like Joakim Noah, LaMarcus Aldridge, etc. They just were never with Knicks picks. So betting on the Knicks, trading away your picks, it's worked out a lot the past 20 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe if you included RJ and you included Toppin, if you included Quickly, you wouldn't have to give up all of them. But I mean, it's not like they don't know that they have 8 to give.
No.
Let me ask you this, MacMahon. How do you feel about, let's say the Knicks could pull this off as they team build here? How do you feel about Jalen Brunson and Donovan Mitchell as your backcourt?
I would have pretty big concerns. I'd have pretty big concerns. I think it'd be a phenomenal offensive backcourt, and I think Mitchell Robinson would have to really clean up a whole lot on the other end.
Yeah, I mean, that their team wouldn't be complete. They would have to then really go to work finding role players around them.
I think you would need to get at least two really good 3-and-D type of players. Like honestly, the same kind of guys that the Mavericks got in Finney Smith and Reggie Bullock, guys who don't need the ball a lot, space the floor, and are, outstanding defenders. I think Robinson would have to, he's obviously phenomenally athletic. I think he'd have to improve defensively though, in terms of always being in the right spot, that kind of stuff, kind of the technique. Because they'd score a lot of points with that backcourt, but I think you really have to be good at surrounding them with the right kind of role players to make up for the fact that they're, like Jalen will take charges. Donovan every once in a while will get in a stance, I guess, sometimes. But
Bontemps, do you think there are any other Donovan Mitchell teams that we can see here that, again, if he becomes available, would go?
I mean, there'd probably be a lot. I mean, you'd probably have a lot of teams be interested. Again, though, I mean, it comes back to how many places do they think are going to be able to keep him long term? That's why Miami
has 2 years left.
He has 3 years.
Year. Right.
Yeah, he has 3 years left.
3 years left, but like if he ain't happy after 2,
right. So I'm going to go through. Bobby Marks put out a list of teams that have at least 7 first-rounders over the next 7 years.
Yeah, okay, so they have their whole draft.
Right, because look, we're crossing Miami off more than likely because they can't give you a ton of picks. Plus,
can I just say something real quick about this, just as a real quick aside? Miami can trade their 2023 pick and their 2028 or 29 pick right now. However, the Oklahoma City Thunder own the Miami pick in 25 or 26. So if Miami called Oklahoma City and said, hey, can we unprotect the 25 pick? And if that happened, then Miami could actually trade 3 picks. They could trade 23, 27, and 29. The difference between them making a side deal with Oklahoma City is the difference between trading 2 picks or 3 picks. Let's say they had a deal. Let's say Miami had a deal for Donovan Mitchell, but they needed the 3rd pick. And they called Oklahoma City. What would Oklahoma City?
What's in it for us?
Remember, they were holding the Kawhi Leonard deal in their hand a couple of years ago. And I mean, then they were giving up a player. It's not apples to apples, but what would Oklahoma City ask for from the Heat? I mean, I would be like, they might ask for like multiple pick swaps. It may not come to that. I'm just as a side.
Also, what is in your career, and as you've mentioned a time or two, you've been covering this league for 20 years. What is your all-time favorite statement from a PR man?
Oh my God, I can't even. Tim Donovan.
And he said,
call Pat Riley Pat Riley says to Danny Ainge. Oh, of course,
And what'd he say?
I forgot about that. Tell Danny Ainge to go F himself.
So right. I think there might be some
great
some
point.
Issues,
Great point. For some reason, I had the brain fart about that one. Great point.
Yes. So I think there might be some challenges making a deal between Danny Ainge and Pat Riley. Maybe bygones are bygones, but I don't know. So I'm just going to run through these teams that have the pick ammo. Houston, and I think the Rockets would be aggressive, but I also think they'd say Jalen Green's completely off the board. Are off the table, and Jabari Smith's completely off the table. And without either of those guys in, I think it's problematic. Indiana, I'm just running through real quick. Memphis, New Orleans, New York, OKC, Orlando, Phoenix, San Antonio, Toronto, and now Utah.
That's true. We all remember when Carmelo was in the middle of a trade, and then the Nets deal didn't come through, and then they all of a sudden quick trade for Darren Williams. a team that might get their eyes on a star and doesn't get Durant could come in for Donovan if they want.
Yeah, I would say definitely. I think
I wouldn't trade Scotty Barnes for Donovan Mitchell, though, would you?
No.
Nope.
Absolutely not.
No. But look, to me, the Knicks have been waiting for a star. Now they're the one team that's not getting Kevin Durant. I don't care what happens. He's not going back to Golden State and he ain't going to New York. 20 or 27 teams, who knows what's going to happen. But the Knicks have been waiting in the weeds to trade for a star. And Donovan Mitchell, if he becomes available, I would think the Knicks would be banging down the door saying, what can we do to get Donovan Mitchell?
I'd also tell you this. While it might not be quite as contentious as the Riley Ainge relationship or lack thereof, the Knicks have not made any friends in Salt Lake City over the last few years with some of the very blatant.
Oh, the last few years? How about the last few months?
Right. Although they can say, hey, we weren't there for Donovan. We were tampering with Jalen Brunson. What are you talking about? I mean, well, y'all got offended by that?
We were there to see our godson.
The only
our
ticket
collective
Alan could
godson.
find was right behind your bench. What are you talking about?
Oh, man.
MacMahon, you had a tweet like an hour before free agency. What was that tweet about Jalen Brunson an hour before free agency?
Oh, basically that the Mavs had been informed that Brunson's not changed his mind. He's going to sign with the Knicks, so the meeting's off.
Like,
that one?
You reported that and other people reported it too. How is that not? I mean, obviously we know. I mean, I made the joke, can a father tamper with his son?
Yeah. And I'm just going to say, I think that most teams in the NBA might want to tread lightly as far as pointing fingers at tampering. That's all I'll say about that.
There was tampering last year. There were 2 picks stripped from this draft that just happened because of tampering. So,
as you said, MacMahon, you could maybe replace most with another word that might start with an A and with 2 L's. Might be a better way to look at it ultimately.
And I feel like the Knicks, hey, they didn't have to give up a whole lot of draft capital to create the space. Okay, we'll throw in a future second rounder, fine.
By the way,
I'm
going to say this is obviously this has become like hypothetical trade machine hour here on the pod today. If like Donovan Mitchell becomes available and the Knicks somehow don't end up with him and he goes somewhere else, like the poor Knicks fans are going to lose their minds. Because
Jalen Brunson.
It depends if he goes somewhere else and it's for a package that the Knicks could have been comparable for.
I just think the Knicks have the star package. They've been waiting for the star to be available that they could get.
We'll see. Yes, it does. I will say this, considering what they just traded Gobert for, the Knicks, if that is the standard, the Knicks have
all the draft picks and they have young guys. Like they have the star package.
Yeah,
they cannot trade for Kevin Durant. But if another guy comes available, they're going to be at the front of the line going, hey, Knicks here. We'd like to make a trade. And if they can't get at this guy, the fans here are going to go ballistic. They're just going to go even more ballistic than they already have been. And it will be a true sight to see because the people here in New York are beyond desperate. Every day, the poor guys doing the sound in the studio, they're all Knicks fans. Are like, when are the Knicks going to get somebody? What are they going to do? I was like, I don't know what to tell you, man. It's been
they got Isaiah Hartenstein.
Hartenstein's a nice signing.
Brunson, come on.
Both good players, both nice signings, but they're not Donovan Mitchell. That would be a different level thing. So
all right.
I don't know. I just watched Jalen Brunson not play Donovan Mitchell in a playoff series.
Thank you for watching this Hoop Collective free agency special. You can listen to our podcast every Tuesday and Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you to our producers, Jeremy and Robert. Thank you to MacMahon. Thank you to Bontemps. I'm going to bed.
Adios, amigos.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.